right. Hello, everyone who is coming in. Hello, hello, welcome. You are tuning in to the info session about intentional communities around the world. And we're just gonna give it a few moments here for everyone to come in, and then we'll get started. Okay, all right, looks like we're slowly getting more folks trickling in. Hello, welcome. My name is Cynthia, and I am a co-director at the Foundation for Intentional Community, FIC. And I am calling in from Vermont, traditional Abenaki lands, where I live at a community called Headwaters EcoVillage. And I'm going to be sharing a lot more about the community where I live and what intentional communities are, and some examples from communities I've gotten to visit through being able to travel the world. So I think I'm gonna just hop right in because I'm gonna be sharing a lot more about myself and this movement in my presentation. So let's get this queued up here. Alrighty, welcome. Once again, if you're just coming in to the Intro to Intentional Communities, this is going to be a 90-minute webinar on what intentional communities are, why they matter, how you can find them, and a quick global tour. I also have a bunch of amazing photos that I've taken from communities that I've visited, including this one, which is probably one of my favorites. This is a photo of Cloth Jordan EcoVillage in Ireland, which is a EcoVillage appendix off of a traditional village in Ireland. So it's this amazing blending of how eco-villages and intentional communities can be very close in proximity and really embedded and an asset to a local community, a local region. So not to think that all these intentional communities are off in the woods somewhere. Most of them are deeply involved with the local municipality where they're located. So right now we're doing this intro piece. I'm going to be sharing a little bit more about who I am and my journey with intentional communities. I have some more questions for all of you about that too. And then I'm going to be giving an overview of what communities are, some resources, and then the fun part, which is sharing photos and stories of communities that I've visited. And then we'll wrap things up with a Q&A session. Oh, great. I love everyone who's putting in the chat box where they're calling from. We have people from Toronto, Canada, South Carolina, wonderful, Wyoming, Virginia, Idaho, all over the place. Good, welcome. So a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, I have gotten to travel to visit many communities. I didn't grow up in an intentional community. I actually grew up north of Boston in a very kind of normal suburb sort of situation. My parents still don't know quite what I'm doing with my life, but they support me nonetheless. And I was really blessed in my life to have a lot of that support, which enabled me to pursue my curiosity of looking for places and people that are reimagining how we're living. You know, so living more sustainably, more regeneratively, more in connection with self and place. I was just drawn to stories that I at first read and then was fortunate enough to go and visit. And that led me on this wonderful path of getting to know the vast network of intentional communities that exist and moving through different leadership positions with organizations trying to support the movement. So I feel a big weight on my shoulders, like wanting to give back for all that I have received in my life and just continue to help grow this network. So I've gotten to work with the Global EcoVillage Network. That's another organization that I highly recommend, especially if you are looking for an eco-village and you're looking to join a community, maybe not in North America. Yeah, so FIC, the organization I'm part of currently, we're very much focused on North America in terms of the communities we have in our directory. And the Global EcoVillage Network, GEN for short, at ecovillage.org, they have more international communities also on their directory. Another group based out of Europe, Ecoles, is a European coalition of permaculture, transition town, eco-village movements. It's this incredible, coalition gathering of organizations that are supporting community-led solutions versus top-down or government-led. So I love these folks. I've also gotten to work with Nextgen, which is the youth movement for intentional communities, trying to get young people to learn about and join eco-villages and supporting young people living in these communities. Numundo is another resource I would recommend, numundo.org. Numundo is short for Nuevo Mundo, New World in Spanish. And this is a network of impact centers. So intentional communities, but also retreat centers, permaculture farms. And the idea here is that it's an alternative Airbnb. So you can actually book a stay at one of these impact centers through the Numundo website. So I especially recommend this if you're thinking of traveling, especially traveling to Costa Rica or anywhere in Central America. This is a wonderful resource. And I have been with the FIC since around 2013, 2014, first as a board member and more recently as a staff member, helping to transform the brand and the program offerings at FIC. It's been such a pleasure to work with some of the folks in this photo. And we're a growing organization, so it's great to be involved with this work at a time when the organization is growing and also it seems interest in intentional communities is growing. I'll talk more about that soon. This is my home at Headwaters EcoVillage located in central Vermont. We're a small community of maybe 6 or so families in the immediate community and 12 families in the kind of larger community surrounding us. And you can see from this photo, we are very focused on the gardens. That's a big thing that brings us all together. And you can see in the photo in the corner, we have very cold winters. So we are one of those communities that is committed to living here year-round, not being snowboards, but actually fostering and growing a community throughout our wonderful seasons. So I love to ski. That's what makes the winters worth it for me. Everyone who lives at our community has built their own home. We actually have had a majority of circular homes. This is one of my neighbors. And I am in the process of building my house. You can see here the framing going up. I was in the fall last year. And this is what the house looks like more currently. We're actually a little bit further along than in this photo. I realize I need to take more updated photos. You can see there is a large greenhouse along the southern wall of my home, and that's intended to be a way of passively heating the house. And I'm using a lot of other innovative passive home technologies and natural building techniques. And yeah, it is, I suppose, not very common that one builds their own home in an intentional community. Most communities already have the structures built and you either buy or rent into the community. But it's been a lifelong dream to build my own home, so I wanted to find a place that enabled that. An intentional community, defined by FIC, is a group of people who live together or share common facilities and who regularly associate with each other on the basis of explicit common values. Right? So it's usually common values, like a common direction, shared interests, shared mission that brings the founding group of individuals together. They have a vision for a type of living, a world that doesn't exist or that they are missing in the mainstream housing options. And that's why they go through the process of trying to create a community. And this is a photo of La Cité Écologique, which is the ecological city in French. This is a photo of their New Hampshire location, but they also have a location in Quebec. And it's one of my favorite communities, very economically self-sufficient. They have a school for the kids who live in the community. They grow a lot of their own food. Really great place. Here's another definition from Bill McCaff. Intentional communities are formed when people choose to live with or near enough to each other to carry out a shared lifestyle within a shared culture and with a common purpose. So once again, it's that common purpose and creating a space where people can build what's called cooperative culture. So as opposed to just the normal de facto mainstream culture, which is often very competitive, we're talking about cooperative culture, building up relationships, opportunities for sharing and mutual support. And you'll notice here that we are talking about residential or place-based communities primarily when we use the term intentional community. Of course, you can have an online community, but we're talking today about communities where people live on the land. Doesn't have to be rural, could be in a city, in some sort of shared property. And that intentional communities are different than, let's say, a retirement community, where sure, you have people living in proximity to each other, but the community isn't really on a mission to fulfill a common purpose. It doesn't have that same level of intentionality behind it. And here's a great photo from Fintry Community in Scotland. We're going to talk more about them later on. These are some of the common types of intentional communities. It's not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the terms you will hear most frequently. And intentional community is really an umbrella term that includes all of these different words. We don't give a rubber stamp of approval on whether or not a community fits one of these criteria. It's really up to each community to decide what it wants to call itself, or even if it wants to use one of these terms. But for sure, co-housing is the fastest growing type of intentional community. It's a model that comes from Denmark, and architects Charles Durrett and Katie McCammett were studying in Denmark and noticing this model. They then coined the term co-housing, brought it to the US, and now it's really spreading. And co-housing is unique in that individuals have private homes or units with shared property group activities, usually including a common house. EcoVillage is a type of community that has a goal of becoming more sustainable across various dimensions of sustainability. So not just ecological, but also looking at sustainability from the social, cultural, and economic perspectives. Housing cooperatives, also very common. Tiny house villages, more and more of those coming up. Senior communities, like intentional senior living communities, exist too. And we also have communes. They make up about 10% of our network, but we do have these either partial or fully income sharing communities in our network as well. Traditional and indigenous communities too. We didn't make up intentional community. It's the way that people have been living for eons. And so we want to honor those communities that are continuing to foster that kind of intentional connection. And transition town. So not everyone needs to up and move to an intentional community or start one. There's a lot that can be done to transition or help to shift your existing place to have more community. All right, so that was my little intro to intentional communities. I want to zone in now on some of the benefits of community living. So for those of you who have lived in community before, and it sounds like we have a few of them, or if you're just imagining like, oh yeah, I want to live in an intentional community, what is it that's attracting you to this way of living? I'd love for you to go ahead and put into the chat box what you see as benefits for living in community. And I'm going to type them into the slide so we can see them all together. All right. Anyone? Companionship, that's of course. Good, companionship. Sustainable or resilient living. Yeah. Less isolation, in all caps. Yeah, Ginny, we're gonna talk about that one more soon. Shared values. Getting away from fear and living on the basis of love. Wonderful. Yeah, Kat writes, I'm at an age where living on my own is becoming challenging. I need an extra set of hands. Well, there you go. Yeah, sometimes people choose to join intentional communities to just have a extra layer of support, and also to be able to contribute to the community in ways that you can. Shared responsibility, social cohesion. Collaboration and co-creation. I like that. Great. A way to heal the earth and a way to heal our hearts and minds away from violence and competition. A means of providing time and space for spiritual growth. Oh, wow. I really like this. I'm going to copy this whole thing in there. Okay, that took up all my space. Great. Focus on health and wellness, shared values, multi-generational living. Good. Re-envisioning how to relate to humans and non-human folk, participating in land stewardship, and building place-based relationships. Wow. Okay, thank you all for sharing. Some of those are very powerful and touching. All right, I'm gonna continue on to my next slide here. So this is my list for much shorter, not as eloquent as what you all wrote down, but my list for some of the benefits I experienced through living in community. Connection for sure. The loneliness, isolation epidemic is a real thing. Having shared resources, which enables us to live more lightly on the land. We don't all need to own our own washing machine or lawnmower. There's a lot that we can share through living in community. And then through that, having greater resiliency for come what may. Yeah, I'll just touch on that for a moment. Like, one of the incredible things at our community through the pandemic was that we were able to choose as a community to create an environment for the kids in the community so that they could be homeschooled and still play with their friends and not have their lives be completely traumatized, as I think many young people going through this time have maybe experienced. So I think that's a way in which we are being adaptive and resilient to the circumstances. Having community support, feeling safer, growing as a person. Living in community is hands down the most challenging personal growth experience one may ever have, because you're living in a situation where you have all these mirrors reflecting back to you the good and the bad parts of yourself. You're just constantly getting a lot of feedback that hopefully helps you grow as a person. Saving money, often living in community can be more affordable. Co-creation, experimentation. Yeah, so I do think that intentional communities are incredible experimentation centers for different communication tools, sustainable technologies. And it's not like all our problems go away in community either. In many respects, I think that intentional communities are microcosms for all the big challenges happening in the world. Those show up in community too. The opportunity, though, in intentional community is that we get to look at those things and talk them out and hear the other side and really come together and move on even with our differences. And I think about the polarization happening in the world right now, particularly in the United States, and how that skill you learn in intentional community to live with differences is so vital. And my last point is fun. I think living in community can be a lot of fun too. All right, so relieving loneliness. This is maybe the #1 benefit for why to live in community. And this statistic comes out of a study that was completed at the end of 2020 that showed that 3 in 5 American adults report feeling lonely. And we know that loneliness has serious health implications, including greater risks for heart disease, stroke, as well as depression, anxiety. So yeah, it's a real thing, and it's not like intentional community is the solution or the only solution, but it is for sure very inspiring for people who are living alone or have only known about living with a small nuclear family, just to know that there's other options out there. The good news, there are thousands of intentional communities around the world. We estimate that there's between 10 to 30,000 intentional communities worldwide, keeping in mind that most of these communities are small and informal, and many of them choose not to list on our directory. But we do have on IC.org's directory about 1,500 to 2,000 intentional communities, mostly in North America and Europe. We also have a print version of the directory. So if you're someone who likes to hold things in your hand and circle and highlight or take the book along on a communities tour, we have that option for you as well. Okay, a few more resources that I want to share with you. We have been offering at FIC many online events, such as this one. I particularly want to bring your attention to our Community Connect event that's happening on the 4th Tuesday of every month. And this is an online networking event for anyone and everyone interested in intentional communities. It's a great opportunity to network with other people around the world who are exploring this pathway, or maybe have lived in community for a long time. And we're also offering on the 4th Thursday of every month a virtual tour of intentional communities, where we sit down with 3 different communities and have them give a tour of their place. So it's a great way to kind of take a communities tour without actually needing to travel anywhere. Plus, we have a whole bunch of weekly workshops and webinars happening at ic.org/events. This is the best way to learn community living skills, to increase your capacity to be a healthy and thriving community member. We are also offering online courses at ic.org/learn. I really believe that this is how we are making starting and joining an intentional community easier than ever before, because we are taking people in our network who have gone through that process of starting communities or multiple communities, who have expertise on how to join a community, and we're giving that information to you in this really sweet format. I am also a matchmaker for people who want to find a community to join that's a good fit for them. This is my own private coaching service, and you can learn more about that on my website at cynthiatina.com. I would love to hear from you if you're at all curious about this opportunity. Okay, so that was what I had in terms of resources, and now we're going to get into the fun part, which is sharing some stories and sharing about some of the communities that I have visited. And I'm just checking the time. Yeah, looks like we're doing pretty good. So I have put together a collection of many different types of communities. We're going to go from the bigger, maybe more well-known ones to some of the smaller and more obscure. And my hope is that this will give you a taste for the breadth and the diversity of community types that exist out there. Starting with the largest intentional community in the world, arguably, which is Orville, the universal city located in India. And what you're looking at is the physical and spiritual center of Orville, called the Matchmaker. This is a place that was barren desert 50 years ago, and the community has literally turned the desert into a lush green food forest. It's so large that you need to rent a scooter. I had to rent a scooter to get around to see everything. About 3,000 people, including visitors, live here and come to stay throughout the course of a year. And this matchmaker, this is actually a globe. You can see a tiny person there to give you a sense for the scale and the scope. And the globe is covered in leaf gold. The inside is built out of pure marble. Surrounding it is these meditation chambers. But what I think is equally as impressive as the matchmaker is this beautiful, large, equally as large banyan tree that's growing nearby. So another hallmark community in the movement is Fintry in Scotland, located on the dunes of Scotland. You can see the gorse growing on the dunes up here in the corner. And Fintry community is famed for having started as a trailer park about 50 years ago, where they were able to convince the sandy, infertile soils of northern Scotland to produce these giant heads of cabbage. And they did that through their connection with nature. So Fintry community is a spiritual community. It also has around 600 residents currently, including a very large events hall where they host all kinds of conferences and workshops. So highly recommend the chance if you get to visit Fintry. Fintry community has a sister community here in the United States called Sirius, like the dog star, in Massachusetts. And I actually lived at this community for about a year and a half. You can see the greenhouse along the southern wall. Well, where did I get the idea for my house? And one of the unique things at Sirius is that all of the structures are built using wood that is harvested and milled from the land. And what you're looking at is the community center, which actually has an octagonal event space up on the second floor. And lots of solar panels, great renewable technology happening at Sirius Community. Much smaller, about 30 or so residents. Ithaca EcoVillage in New York State is the largest eco-village with, I believe, now over 400 residents living in 3 co-housing neighborhoods. So here's an example of an eco-village that also calls itself a co-housing community because of the way that their development happened and the way they've structured the community. So co-housing community with an ecological focus, located a very short drive away from the city of Ithaca, but backed by this pond and different farms, hundreds of acres of forest to explore. So yeah, truly wonderful place. Earth Haven EcoVillage in North Carolina is a community that I highly recommend visiting if you want to experience like a true eco-village that's really walking the talk in terms of its sustainability, completely off-grid, a lot of natural homes, and quite large in size, with many opportunities for easy rental if you're wanting to visit or stay there for a little while, as well as different work trade, work exchange programs. And Earth Haven is located pretty close to Asheville. And Asheville also has a number of intentional communities, some co-housing, some eco-village, some more mainstream. So it's a good place to go if you want to have that as your base for doing a communities tour. La Cité Écologique. So I spoke about them a little bit earlier on in the presentation, but I didn't share the backstory, which is that La Cité began as a summer camp for kids. And the kids loved it so much that they convinced the parents to start a community on a property nearby and, develop a school, start businesses. And today the community is so successful that they began with their location in Quebec, and they now have a second location in New Hampshire, both with around 80 or so residents. And they are a job supplier to the local region. Yeah, so we talk about regenerative, sustainable practices across all different dimensions, not just ecological, but being so sustainable economically that you can actually be a resource provider to the region in which you live. And their school is also open to children who don't live at the EcoVillage, but providing education as well to the surrounding area. Yeah. Dancing Rabbit EcoVillage in Missouri. So this is a community where FIC has our offices located. We have staff all around the world, but our main offices are at Dancing Rabbit EcoVillage. And this is another community that's really walking the talk. To live at Dancing Rabbit, you have to have your car as part of a car sharing program. So you can't just have your own vehicle, but you need to participate in this program. And because of the location in rural Missouri, there's no building codes. You can really experiment with all these incredible natural building techniques and have composting toilets, do a lot of things to create, a truly ecological village. And not all ecovillages are in the countryside. This is an example, LA EcoVillage in Los Angeles, California, of a community that is building up right in the heart of a big city, and having that same level of commitment to being sustainable and fostering community and connection, even while living in an urban environment. All right, so that was a lot of the eco-villages. Now we're going to talk more about co-housing in particular. And I love this photo of Pioneer Valley Co-housing in Massachusetts because you can see the layout of a classic kind of co-housing community where the cars are parked outside of the community and there's pedestrian pathways going in. So it creates this car-free zone, which is a lot safer for the children running about. Most of the homes are duplexes. So again, a way to save on resources, to share resources by sharing a wall in your home. And this is the big common house where there is a kitchen and a dining hall and some shared office and activity space. So not all co-housing communities look like this. You can also have co-housing communities in one apartment building in the city, but here is kind of the classic co-housing model. Heartwood Co-housing in Colorado is the largest co-housing community by landmass. I think they have around 300 acres. So yeah, lots of space to run around and explore. Sometimes people think like, oh, living in community, you're all just like stuck together and too many people all the time. But the neat thing about having homes that are more clustered is it can enable having more wide open space around the community and actually creating more opportunities for privacy through that. Groundswell Co-housing is also called Yarrow EcoVillage in British Columbia, Canada. And this is an example of a community that is located right next to a thriving, wonderful little town on its own accord called Chilliwack in British Columbia. And so you have this wonderful dynamic of the traditional town, the eco-village, co-housing, and then they have these really magnificent farms growing behind it. And then further back is a mountain. So I just love the kind of yeah, spectrum, the gradient of the normal to getting more and more alternative, more and more wild. It's great. Village Hearth Cohousing in North Carolina is a 55 plus LGBTQ community. So here's an example of a community with a quite niche focus and wanting to create a place for people who are older. So this is a senior community, but also even having a more specific focus on LGBTQ individuals. All right, so Twin Oaks Community in Virginia is one of the oldest income sharing communities. They've been around for about 50 years, and everyone who lives in this community has a job, has their income coming through businesses that the community owns and operates. As I mentioned earlier, it's actually a small number of communities that have this income sharing model. About 10% or so of our network. At Twin Oaks, they have a tofu making business, a hammock making business, and a large farm with a lot of dairy cows as well. And Twin Oaks had an acorn. Actually, although recently I heard that at Twin Oaks, one of the original twin oak tree, one of them came down in a storm. So it's something that happens in community. But anyways, so Twin Oak had an acorn, which is a nearby community also in Louisa County in Virginia. And they are also an income sharing community that has a wonderful seed saving business. Here's another income sharing community called Eastwind in Missouri. They have a nut butter business that is sustaining the community. All right, so now talking about some of the more spiritual communities. Probably one of the more famous ones is Dolinar in Italy, the Federation of Dolinar. And what you're looking at is part of the Temples of Humankind, which was a underground cave dug into the side of a mountain by hand and kept in secret from the Italian government for about 16 years. Yeah, and this place is pretty magnificent, pretty far out. Mosaics on the floors, mural paintings on all of the walls. And Dolinar is a community that is focused on kind of their own version of religion, spirituality based on Egyptian mythology primarily. And in Dolinar, I mentioned it's a federation, so it's actually a collection of multiple communities, what they call nuclei, and each nuclei has its own focus. Like one is focused on growing food for the community, another for producing energy, another for manufacturing, and so on. So amazing, fascinating example of a very alternative spiritual community. Buderhof communities, so these are a network of about 100 intentional communities that are traditional Christian communities and are proud supporters in our network who identify as an intentional community and are living their own values just the same as the other communities in our network. Plum Village in France is a Buddhist community based on the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. It's actually one of the communities where, I'm not sure if he's living there currently, but he helped to co-create. Okay, so this is a very special community started by the Masook people of Alabama. I'm not gonna try to pronounce because I'm gonna mispronounce the name of the community. But this is a people who are returning to their ancestral homelands that they were forcibly removed from. And they are focused on reviving their culture, speaking their language, which is an endangered language, and just creating an intentional community, an eco-village for their people. Such a powerful example of what is possible when we come together and reclaim community. Torre Superiori in Italy, this is another favorite of mine. So what you're looking at is actually a 13th century stone village that was abandoned. And people have returned back to this village and are creating an eco-village surrounded by olive groves and vineyards. You walk through this kind of village, as you can see, it's all one building, but there's these tunnels and passageways and different rooms and apartments. Just incredible to relive actually how people were living in village hundreds of years ago. And this is a movement happening throughout Southern Europe, in particular, Spain, Portugal, Italy, where you have many stone villages that have been abandoned as people have moved to the cities over time. And there's a lot of government support right now to repopulate these areas. And it's a great opportunity for eco-villagers to move in and create more communities. There's a few wonderful examples, including Torre Superiori, of this happening. Another example of transitioning traditional villages in Senegal, the Senegalese government has committed the transition of 14,000 villages into eco-villages. So an excellent example of a more sustainable development pathway for the global South that's not following the pathway of the Western world of industrializing, leaving the village, but actually staying in the village and helping it transition to becoming more prosperous and more ecological. There is some question here, like, okay, what does it mean to make an eco-village? Just sticking a solar panel on a village community, is that doing it? But nonetheless, I think the intentions of the government are good in terms of wanting to support eco-villages. Tiny house villages, as I mentioned, this is also a growing thing where a lot of these communities are popping up in urban environments where you can fill in a gap or a vacant lot and put in a tiny house and create a more affordable housing option and much smaller footprint for people who want to be in community and in connection and live more small. Camp communities, this is a great example of a network of communities, about 100 or so spread across North America and Europe, that are homes for individuals with disabilities, physical, especially severe physical disabilities. And I think it is amazing to experience the Camp Hill model, where these people are not just kind of like pushed away, but really given responsibility. They're given educational opportunities, jobs, and roles within the community. And when we talk about being welcoming and inclusive for some of the most marginalized people in our society, this is them. Okay, and then transition town movement. So as I mentioned earlier, we don't have to up and move to an intentional community. There's a lot that we can do through free resource libraries and sharing tools, sharing a community garden in urban block. There's so much that we can do to help foster us coming closer together. So the last example I'm going to leave you with is the village building convergence that happens every year in Portland, Oregon, organized by City Repair, which is a movement to reclaim and transition intersections called intersection repair. So those crossroads where often lots of cars are coming through, let's go and paint a mural, which helps to slow down the traffic. Let's put a little tea hut in one corner, or a free book library in another corner, and recreate some of these places. You can look to, in Europe, these villages that are created more on a human scale, that have actually at the plaza, they have the community gathering space. But in the United States, what has happened is that many of our communities have developed post-automobile. And so we are on the scale of the automobile, of the car. We're not on that human scale. We don't have as many pedestrian gathering places. So there's a big movement to help to foster more of this in our cities. So there you have it, a very short, I could go on with many more examples, but I think I'm going to leave it there. And I will leave you with one question. Are you getting enough community in your life? Can you think about that? Okay, so we are at time for some Q&A. So I think we have, let's check the time here. Yeah, we have a good amount of time for questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A box. You can also raise your hand. I'd love to hear other voices. And I'll do a quick scan of the chat thread, and also anyone who's watching on Facebook Live. I'll look at the comments and see if we have any questions there. So I see that Jess has put in a question about what are the models for choosing to leave a community? Yes, thank you so much for asking this, Jess. I think it's an important question. And I always encourage people who are wanting to join a community to make sure you have a super clear understanding, like written down, signed agreement, so you understand how you join a community and also how you leave. And there are many different models for this. You know, if you don't own property in a community, often it's just as simple as stating your intention for leaving, and maybe there's some sort of, I don't know, like goodbye thing that you'll, like a party or something to see you off. But you know, in all cases, you want to make sure that leaving is simple, clear, and smooth. If you own property in a community, like for example, in my community where I have purchased land and I've built my house, well, that's where it gets a little more complicated to leave because there's property involved. And so at our community, you submit your intent to leave, and you would need to sell your home and property at that point. And so we, at our community at Headwaters, the community has first right to buy the property and also first right of refusal. So what the community is trying to do is be able to buy the property so it can sell it to a person that it wants to move in next, as opposed to me just selling it on the real estate market and then, you know, who knows who could move in. But each community has their own process for this. Some co-housing communities do let you sell on the open market, and there's, you know, different processes that communities go through around that. So good question. I hope that answered it. Okay. Oh yes, Erica, yes, you will receive a recording of this webinar to watch again and share with others. Yes. You'll get that via email after the event. And as I mentioned, we are live streaming on Facebook, so you can watch it there too. All right, now I'm going to go over to the Q&A box. We're going to see what we have there. All right, we have a question. Are there any communities that are sober or at least limit consumption of alcohol, drugs, except for special circumstances? Yeah, let's see. I mean, certainly there are communities that have really strict rules around alcohol and drug use. I think that in particular, most spiritual communities like Christian communities and meditation, Buddhist communities have really strict requirements around that. I'm sure there are also secular communities that do too. I'm think of anything that comes to mind right now, but if you were to spend a little time looking at our directory at ic.org/directory, and maybe even like searching for the search term sober, and see what comes up, I think you'll find some for sure. And be in touch if you're at all struggling to find any. Okay. Do building codes and taxes differ for IC? Usually not. Usually intentional communities are subject to, for better or worse, the same building codes as another place, unless the community has gone through a process to get a different status. Yeah, so, you know, you're still subject to you know, different requirements around how close you can build, how many people you can have in the same house. It actually can be really challenging for some communities to get started because of the restrictive building codes in some municipalities and jurisdictions. But there are other areas where it's a lot easier to create a community, especially more rural areas make it a lot easier. And the taxes really depends on what legal structure the community has. If they are an LLC, if they are a nonprofit or a community land trust or a housing cooperative, there's different tax statuses for those entities. For example, nonprofit. If a nonprofit owns land, then they are tax exempt. And that's actually the model that we were using when I lived at Sirius Community. We were a nonprofit organization, and everyone who lived there was part of the housing program. So we didn't own the land and we didn't own as individuals our property, but we were part of this rental program. So yeah, lots of different ways that can look. Okay. Oh wow, so many great questions. I'm gonna take a sip of my water. Okay. Is it difficult to find a community that will allow you to bring your pets? Good question, Ginny. I don't think it's difficult at all. I think that most communities do allow and welcome pets. It might be a little more difficult if you're looking to join an urban community or maybe some co-housing communities. But usually, yeah, usually communities, if you're talking about a dog or a cat, they're used to getting that kind of requests and can make space for that. I've had some one client who wanted to bring their donkey with them to different intentional communities, and that was much more of a challenge to find a community that would be open to that. But yeah, dogs and cats are usually good to go. All right. Yes. So someone asked here that they missed the first part of this meeting, so wanted to know if I work as a consultant, what types of things I can help with, what does it cost? Yeah. So I do work as a consultant. I'm going to put my website into the Q&A box. Or sorry, into the chat box. It's just cynthiatina.com. And I do a variety of things for intentional communities, some branding website stuff. But what I can probably most help all of you with is with my community matchmaking service. So that's where you fill out a form on my website, an intake form sharing about what you're looking for in a community. And then you schedule an hour-long session with me where I ask you a lot of questions to better understand your situation. You ask me questions that you have about living and joining a community. And then at the end, I give you recommendations for communities that I think will be a good fit based on your situation. And I usually recommend communities that I have been to personally, or I can vouch for through having friends who live there or working with them through FIC. And that is $75 for that whole process. And I do offer sliding scale as well. Good question. Okay. How do you recommend to get started? Are visitors really welcome at most communities? Mhm. Yeah, so Erica, what I would recommend for getting started is, yeah, doing a little preliminary exploratory research to get a sense for what is out there. Like even just what I gave today will give you kind of a sense for the diversity of communities. And after doing a little bit of that, I would sit down and have a moment of reflection where you create a list of what you are looking for in a community. Ideally, about 10 or so things, like I really want a multi-generational community. I really want to live in the Northeast. I really want there to be a mountain or water nearby. Whatever the things are that are most important to you, write them down and put a star next to those things that are non-negotiable, because it's really hard to find your ideal community that meets all of your wish list criteria, but you do want to be clear about what are those things that you absolutely want to have in your community. And then I would go on, and I talk about this a lot more in depth in my course, but then from there you do your research to try to find communities that meet most of your criteria. And in doing that, you're going to identify some communities that you're really excited about. And those are the communities that you're going to want to try to visit. And most communities, if they're open to new members, they do welcome visitors. One caveat is that we are, of course, still going through this whole COVID thing, and different communities have different requirements for visitors at this time. And so some communities may want you to do like an online virtual tour or start the membership visitation process virtually. But still, most communities have tours, or you can stay overnight, or you can do like a workshop, a program there. Communities are really used to getting requests for visitors, and most communities that are open to visitors have a website where you can learn about them as well. And from that place, yeah, you just want to continue with doing your online research, planning some community tours, getting to visit different communities. And through that process, like once you have boots on the ground in a community, you're going to get a better sense for what it's all about. You're going to learn more about what you like, what you don't like, keep refining your wish list. That's how I would suggest getting started. Yeah, great question. Alrighty, so we have a question here. Can you discuss some options for acquiring land for the purpose of starting a community, particularly financial options? Yeah, so this is not my area of expertise. I would really direct you to some of our upcoming courses. We have two in particular that would be excellent for learning all about this. I'm going to put a link in for the Starting an Intentional Community course at ic.org/starting-course. And that's starting on August 25th, so really soon. And then the other course I'd also recommend is with Clifford Pollen, who is a lawyer for intentional communities. And that link is ic.org/legal-course. And Clifford goes into all of the different options for acquiring land, different legal structures to set up. And as I mentioned, we have scholarships for all of these courses. So please take a course so you can just get a sense for all of the different options that exist. I would say from my experience that oftentimes, like there's a few different pathways. Oftentimes there already is an individual within the founding group who has access to land, and that land meets the requirements of the community. Other times a founding group needs to go on a proper land search and, figure out their selection criteria, source their resources, and actually go to get the land that they're looking for. Financial options range across the board of, as I mentioned, having a few individuals in the group with means who are able to invest in or fund or give a loan to the community to get started. These friendly loans are really great. Finding a loan through a bank is becoming more easy, especially with co-housing communities coming more and more into the forefront. So that's an option. Another option is some combination of fundraising and crowdfunding, or perhaps even treating the community as a business and having some investors who'd want to invest in that business proposition. So go into that a lot more, but at least that's like just a little overview on what you can expect. And I do encourage you to check out those 2 courses. Oh yeah, just to clarify for John, 90% that fail within the first year. So yeah, just a lot of groups are like, oh, we want to start a community. I think most of us, myself included, have thought about that at some point and maybe taken a few steps towards doing the process, but it is a big commitment. It's a lot of time. You got to have resources. You got to know certain skills. And so, yeah, it can be high failure rate in the beginning, but then there is, like, once you make it past a few years, and especially once you have a core group, you get access to some resources. There's more of a stability that occurs. Yeah. Okay, good. And I'm glad. Thank you, Finn, for sharing my website there in the chat. So many wonderful comments. Thanks everyone for leaving your comments. Okay, and we have another question. I'll read this one out loud. So for a co-living agreement, sharing a house, is there a particular legal structure which you've seen used for a co-living arrangement sharing a house? Well, I mean, it depends, like who owns the house currently. If you're buying it together, there are some options for co-buying. Actually, we recently did a really great workshop. I can maybe try to find. We did a workshop on co-buying property with friends. That might be a good fit for your model. I can see if we can include that in the follow-up email. So yeah, it depends. Like, I've seen some communities where they have a standard tenant renter type situation where one person or a couple owns the home. And that is tricky because then you can get into very quickly some interesting power dynamics. But I have seen communities use that model. Another model might be a housing cooperative where you are all bought in together into this property. Another model might be is if you buy the property through another entity that individuals in the community have some stake in, such as an LLC or maybe even a nonprofit organization. So yeah, I think if it's just a house, sometimes simpler is better. Yeah, I hope that was helpful. Again, not my area of expertise, but I hope to point you in some good directions with that online course, especially on legal basics. Okay, good. Glad you've enjoyed it, Jenny. Good. All right. Well, let me see. Anyone have their hand up that they'd like to ask a question out loud? Not seeing anyone. Okay. All right, good. Well, I think I've answered all of the questions. Thank you all so much for coming and listening. Yeah, I really loved all of your questions and learning a little bit about you. For all of you community seekers out there, I'm wishing you so much luck on your journey. I hope to see you at one of our online courses. Feel free to reach out to me at any point if you have questions. I put my website into the chat earlier, and there's a contact form there, so that's a really good way to be in touch with me. And yeah, great. Well, go out there and let's create some more community, y'all. Thank you. Take care. Bye.